This is the Dangerous Waters podcast, where we dive deep into dangerous waters. I'm your host, Alex, and in today's episode, we will be discussing what is happening in Syria. What are the implications in the aftermath of the Syria collapse after more news has come out regarding the situation? In our next episode, we will be talking about new Ukraine war casualty figures, updates on the United Healthcare CEO's murder, as well as new Trump statements on a potential Biden prosecution and immigration policies. Coming right up. All right, let's talk about Syria. This is such a fascinating geopolitical topic that I decided to dedicate an entire episode once again to discuss what is going on. There are so many different groups of countries, interests that are all combined together in this Syria conflict. We have Russia, we have Iran, we have Israel, we have the United States, we have Syria themselves, and all sorts of different interests working against each other. Now, after the Assad regime collapse, what we are seeing now is that the HTS terrorist group has full control over Assad regime land, as well as the land that they held previously. So now they control roughly 2/3 of the Syria landmass. This is going along with their recent advances in Homs. They also were able to take over the Russian naval base in Tartarus, very massive, Russia's only naval base in the Mediterranean, and we'll talk more about those implications later on. Alongside that, we have news that Assad has fled to Russia. He sought political asylum and was granted as such. Now he is in Russia. Very interesting, though, we actually had prior reports from Reuters earlier today claiming with high accuracy that Assad was killed in a Russian airstrike. And interestingly enough, we actually had news of a Syrian Airlines flight which suddenly stopped transponding in their radar roughly 1,600 feet above ground in Syria. People thought that Assad may have been on that plane. Turns out he hasn't been in that plane. We're still not sure what's going on with that specific plane, but Assad is safe. Looks like Gaddafi is not going to be happening to him anytime soon due to his Russian extradition. Now, let's talk about what this aftermath means for Russia. Russia played a massive role in helping build up the Assad regime, in reinforcing it with both troops from the Russian Ministry of Defense, but at the same time, Wagner Group. Wagner, obviously, we've seen what happened with them. The leader, Prigozhin, was killed in an airplane by a Russian surface-to-air missile. And what ended up happening was that just completely derailed Wagner operations around the world. Sort of a self-sabotage, if we think about it like that. Now, what ended up happening is a lot of these Wagner troops, either they dispersed or they were forced to sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense to continue the work that they were doing under the Russian flag officially. Now, when it comes to the naval port in the Mediterranean Sea, as well as the logistics bases that Russia built in Syria, a lot of implications here for the future of Russia's power projection around the world. Obviously, when you have no access to the Mediterranean Sea, there is a lot of conflicts, a lot of problems that you are not able to get yourself into. The Mediterranean Sea obviously being a very strong position of power for Israel, for Europe, and for the United States, now uncontested from Russia. Russia will no longer have the infrastructure to continue their ship advances, their global power projection in Europe, in the Mediterranean region. Now, this is not going to be completely the case, obviously, because Russia has surface-to-surface missiles that are ICBMs, that are hypersonic, that are capable of nuclear strikes anywhere around the world. Unfortunately, what we see in real life is that these threats ultimately don't amount to much. Because if you think about what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in these small conflicts, these are not nuclear level conflicts. These are not global world war conflicts. These are minor areas in which, let's say, if an American aircraft carrier happened to be in the area, a lot of fighting would stop. If America just threatened nukes out of nowhere, those terrorists are not going to stop. They will continue doing what they're doing. That's the difference between power projection when it comes to long-range missiles versus having a aircraft carrier or having a naval base, having the real raw capability to move infantry, to move localized weapons and localized military support in the Middle East. Massive, massive failure for Russia in the removal of that naval port's access in the Mediterranean. At the same time, this completely cripples infrastructure networks for Russia when it comes to its expansionist Africa policies. Now, we've seen what's going on in Africa. We have, obviously, the United States being a big part of trying to redevelop Africa to very limited success, if I'm being frank. It's not really looking too good for America. African nations are not really seeing hope in the Biden administration or really America in general. Just recently, with a meeting with African leaders, Joe Biden was found to have fallen asleep mid-meeting. Really a good look for America. But anyways, like I was saying, this is very bad for Russia. Russia was able to, for a pretty long time, maintain somewhat of a foothold in Africa by promoting defense agreements with African countries. Look at Burkina Faso, for example. These are countries that really wanted Russian aid, wanted Russian defense for their regime's stability. At the same time, Russia would take advantage of their position in these countries to mine gold, mine diamonds, and in fact, that was something that the Wagner Group was very into doing. Sadly for Russia, a lot of these efforts may grind to a halt or may be severely limited because their lack of a staging ground in Syria. Syria was their hub outside of Russia to move troops, move equipment, and really maintain their foothold in the Africa region. Now, because of this, Russia may no longer be able to do as much, and this gives China a very powerful potential to expand in Africa without Russian hindrance. Now, we could obviously say, oh, well, Russia and China are working together. You know, they have some now mutual alliance that covers all aspects. They are so close. You've never seen them this close before. But in reality, they have differences. They are competitors. They only joined together because of their mutual hatred of American expansionist foreign policy. Now, at the same time, this is very bad for Russia, very good for Turkey, because just recently we've seen Russia reach out to Turkey and ask them for guarantees of safety for their troops to leave Syria. Right now, Turkey has so much power in Syria, they were basically able to take over the entire Assad regime practically unopposed. If you look at their army numbers, or HTS's army numbers, they have, 40,000 troops in total, whereas the Assad army, the Syria Arab army, had something, I believe, over 200,000 troops. Yet, what did that amount to when it came to the actual fighting, when it came to actually defending Syria? Nothing. And the same can be said about what happened in Afghanistan. The US government spent billions of dollars, decades, building up the Afghan government to try to make and maintain somewhat of a democratic presence in Afghanistan. Within weeks, we saw Al-Qaeda take over the entirety of the country, so much so that Trump negotiated directly with Al-Qaeda, bypassing the Afghan government to withdraw troops. Controversial decision, yes, but goes to show that the money doesn't mean anything. The support doesn't mean anything if they fail in battle. And that's what we saw just yesterday with the Assad regime. Trump also recently came out with a Truth Social post calling Russia to go home. He claimed that the only reason Russia would be in Syria for their benefit was to mess with the Obama administration. But now that Obama's gone, new players are involved, the situation has evolved, it's time for Russia to go home. That's what he claimed. Now, when it comes to Trump, he said as well, there is no reason for the United States to be involved in the Syria conflict. Now, he says this, he says one thing, maybe he'll do something else. When he goes into office, he might even withdraw the American troops that are currently stationed in Syria. Who knows? But what I can say is that Trump is happy about this Russian loss in Syria. Despite his anti-war rhetoric with Ukraine recently, especially toward the end of his campaign, he has conducted multiple actions that make me believe that he is actually pro-Ukraine, contrary to many people's beliefs. First, he was able to bring Zelensky into the fold and have his approval on potential negotiations. Now, look, the war is going to have to end one way or another, with or without negotiations. I think it is better for all parties to at least come to the table and discuss. Now, whether the discussions amount to anything or not is a different story, but it is beneficial that at least they are open to dialogue, and Trump was able to do that. Furthermore, Trump has made many statements somewhat against Putin. He met with Zelensky just yesterday in the opening of the Notre Dame, and he wore blue and a yellow tie, Ukraine flag colors. He met with Zelensky. Zelensky seemed pretty happy. His cabinet picks have all been sort of hawkish and pro-Ukraine. Now, maybe this is a trap that Trump is setting against Russia. Very possible. He claimed in an interview before the election that he purposely positioned John Bolton in his administration to bring fear into his enemies. Russia, China sees John Bolton and they're worried of going to war. I believe this is possibly Trump's strategy again. But no matter what, he is willing to, at least on the surface, help Ukraine and try to defend America against Russian interests overseas. Let's take a look at what Biden is saying about this conflict. Recently, Biden came out with an address in which he called the conflict, quote, a fundamental act of justice, but a moment of risk and uncertainty. Based on this statement, we can also see that at least on the surface, Biden is happy about what has happened in Syria, probably because of the anti-Russia angle. He also claimed that his foreign policy was the cause of this being the case, of these beneficial events for the United States happening in the Middle East. Me personally, I don't agree with that. The cause is Israel. Israel was able to massively deteriorate Hamas, Hezbollah networks, really drive a nail into the heart of Iran. And because of Israel's posturing, which went against the interests of the Biden administration, we were able to see what just happened yesterday and what will be going forward into the future with Syria. Alongside this statement, we also have new reports of dozens of U.S. airstrikes on ISIS forces in the east of Syria. This is somewhat a tame response because the United States has not really been very public and very open about who they're backing, about their involvement in the conflict, but has always put the focus on the anti-ISIS mission in Syria. To continue with that positioning, they struck targets in Syria on the eastern side so that they can continue saying that we're going against ISIS. Now, who knows who these targets are? We really have no idea, but this is ultimately a very small amount of involvement from the official United States foreign policy angle. For our final topic of today, let's take a look at Israel. We cannot have a discussion on Syria and the events that just happened without looking at Israel's involvement. Israel is currently taking advantage of the situation of the crippling of the Assad regime. We just have new reports coming in of massive Israeli airstrikes in Damascus, Israeli airstrikes in Assad territory holding chemical weapons as well as other munitions stockpiles. Israel is taking a long look at this and saying, we need to do something. We are going to strike and make sure that the new occupiers of Syria will not have access to weapons which could potentially damage their land. At the same time, we also see a massive push under Netanyahu's direction to capture a buffer zone in the Golan Heights into Syria. We saw Israel annex the Golan Heights under Trump's administration to his approval, and this really gives Israel more of a potential landmass to expand and grow their population. Now, because of this conflict, because of the anti-regime forces being in control of Syria, as well as their lack of an anti-Israeli stance, Israel is taking advantage by capturing Mount Hermon in Syria. This is quite a far distance away from their current Golan Heights land holdings. This is a very big offensive. It was practically unopposed. Reports are saying that they did not meet resistance along their conquest, and now they will be able to take control over a larger swath of land in Syria. Practically unopposed. Obviously, Israel is benefiting a lot from this current situation in Syria. They've benefited from their actions fighting against Hezbollah, against Hamas, and this is really the icing on the cake for Israel. We can see that they are reaping the benefits of their aggressive foreign policy. Moving forward, I think we can expect Israel to play an even larger role in Syria, conducting more airstrikes, maybe capturing more buffer zones, and really maintaining a strong foothold in Syria, in Syrian logistics networks, so that they can prevent another potential rise of Iran, rise of anti-Israeli militias, and also drive a complete wall against Syrian logistics networks benefiting Hezbollah. Obviously, Syria was a big way for Iran to funnel weapons and personnel, training, knowledge, all of these things. Massive smuggling apparatus going on in Syria under the Assad regime, and Israel has every interest to maintain control of the current unstable situation and be able to stop potential smuggling of arms into Hezbollah. With that being said, thank you for tuning into Dangerous Waters. Catch you all in the next one. Peace out.